Good morning, and thank you for joining us for SVB University. I am your moderator, Amanda Barton, also the publisher of Seniors Blue Book, a handy dandy resource for aging well that you can pick up at any CVS or Walgreens back in the pharmacy section. With us today, we are going to be talking about having that uncomfortable conversation. We have a dynamic group of folks with us today. Really excited to introduce you. We'll start with you, Mark Beland, who is with the Hospice. How are you this morning, Mark?
Good. How are you, Amanda?
I am great. Thank you so much for asking. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been at Avow as their community liaison for almost 5 years. And as a community liaison, my responsibility is to create awareness in the community about our services. So I appreciate this opportunity because hospice in particular is very misunderstood and most people don't want to discuss it. And like the other professionals that we have on the meeting, none of these are conversations people want to have, but it's really helps when that traumatic time comes to be able to have some kind of plan in place. So I appreciate you doing this, Amanda.
There's only two things in life that are inevitable, right? Death and taxes. All right. So also joining us today is attorney Gregory Nespickel. How are you this morning, Greg?
I am great. Thanks for having me. You mentioned death and taxes. So that's two things that actually we deal with. So we got both of those covered at our office. I'm an estate planning attorney. I've been at it for almost 20 years. I have offices in Fort Myers and Naples, and we deal with a lot of wills and trusts. Sometimes that's going to involve estate taxes and income tax and gains and things like that. So we try to cover it all from a pretty holistic standpoint. As you know, we're also able to deal with elder law issues like Medicaid planning and even getting people evaluated and that kind of thing. So we try to cover all those bases as much as possible.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Greg, and welcome. All right, Miss Rachel, how are you this morning? Rachel's joining us from Harvey Englehart Funeral and Cremation Services in Fort Myers.
Hello, I'm glad to be here this morning. And I've been a funeral director with Harvey Englehart for about the last 10 years, basically helping families from the initial moment of a call where a death has occurred, or in a lot of other areas, we actually do some educational seminars and things to try to help people kind of learn what it takes to set things up ahead of time, because that is a big part of estate planning. It's kind of the last part that often gets overlooked, but it's very much something that people can put in order just as they do with any other aspects of their final planning.
I would absolutely emphasize that it is part of your estate planning. It's definitely something that people need to talk about, so our last wishes are maintained and respected. So I definitely look forward to diving into that today. I think what we'll do just for kind of chronological order is start with Greg, because I don't care how young you are, how old you are, you really should have your documents in order if you're an adult. So Greg, what would you say are some of the most single-handedly important documents that you should have in place when you start to think about these things?
Yeah, and you're right, Amanda. I think it's only about 4 in 10 Americans actually even have a simple will in place. So procrastination, just the difficulty in making some decisions, some misinformation out there, they all kind of gang up and people end up putting it off, forgetting about it, or sometimes even worse, trying to do things on their own and end up with more harm than good kind of situation. At a minimum, everyone should probably consider having a last will and testament, at least to be able to choose who their beneficiaries are going to be, who's going to receive their estate, in some circumstances, when and how they would receive their estate. So if you have a young beneficiary, at least you can set up a uniform transfers to minors account. If you have a minor child at home, you can nominate someone to be their legal guardian. So that covers a lot of ground. You can also choose the personal representative or executor to handle all of this. Now, a will goes through probate. A lot of people seem to think just the opposite, but Avoiding that's great, but if you don't, then you certainly at least want the right go-to person to handle all of this stuff. And then, that's really the after death kind of things. And yeah, that's difficult. But the other side of it, which really gets short shrift, is the incapacity side of things. Who's going to be there to take care of paying your bills if you can't do that, or to make medical decisions, or if you're in a situation where your condition isn't going to improve and the doctors feel like this is it, what do you want to have happen? Because that's really where a lot of the friction comes in. Family members disagree, they remember selectively a lot of times, and if you don't have clear directions, then you're just really asking for trouble.
No, I couldn't agree more with that selective memory. So, I know that a lot of folks they go toward the trust aspect. So can you talk to us about the different kind of trusts that are out there and how maybe they could help you avoid probate?
Yeah, absolutely. So trusts come in a whole lot of different flavors, and you can be as creative as you'd like, and they can help with estate planning and tax planning and special needs planning and Medicaid benefits planning and all kinds of things. But the most common ones that probably all your viewers would be familiar with are the revocable living trusts. So those you can change, you can amend, you can, pretty much take assets in and out. You're the trustee, you're the beneficiary. It's very pain-free, but the assets that you fund into that trust that are owned by the trust when you die don't need that whole probate process. So it can be really helpful in that situation. You're also able to protect those distributions so they're not subject to all the claims against those beneficiaries, whether they have bills or judgments or divorces. And again, what you put in that trust and you've set up that trustee to handle, that's part of your incapacity planning. So if you can't handle your own affairs, you kind of have a guardianship already set up, the right people, fully empowered with all the instructions all set to go.
Yes, absolutely. And I know the next step of pre-planning, just as Rachel said, really should be including your pre-planning for your funeral and your final arrangements. So I know this is an uncomfortable topic, Rachel. Like, what's your advice on how to bring it up? When's the best time to bring it up? And what's your advice there?
Well, you're right. It is something that people feel very awkward about because when everyone's celebrating Christmas or a big family get together, nobody wants to come in and say, "Hey, let's talk about death and dying." So it's something that would probably be helpful if you approach it from the same frame of mind that you would estate planning, because it's just one more facet of that that's kind of at the very end. It's just like planning for life insurance or accidental insurance or anything like that. It's not something you really want to have to think about dealing with, but people aren't afraid to get those kinds of things set up because it's just another way to protect the people that you love. So I think the way of approaching it is to just say, look, I'm not planning on going anywhere soon, but I love you. You're my family members, and I want to make sure that these things are in line. This is something I'm doing out of my care and compassion for you as my beloved children or my siblings or whomever the person is, so that it's approaching it from more of a caring place, that you're doing it for those family members.
Exactly. And that's definitely how it should be looked at for sure. Now, as far as costs go, the cost of living obviously goes up every year. What about the cost of dying?
Well, the cost of funerals, they do go up every year, just slightly. So maybe somewhere between $25 to $50 a year, the basic cost will go up. As well as on merchandise, the cost of merchandise like caskets, urns, necklaces, keepsakes, things like that go up as well. So the idea is the earlier that you pre-plan and fund it, the more you'll potentially save, because hopefully, as we just said, you're not actually planning on passing away for a long, long time. So you're planning something maybe 15, 20, even more than that years in advance. And as that creeps up over the years, at the time that you actually do pass away, it's a guaranteed cost that's prepaid so that your family isn't left exposed to the inflation that's occurred over the years.
Right.
It is important, as I was listening to Greg talk about setting up estate planning and trusts and all of that, a big thing that's usually missing in the wills would be an actual statement indicating who the specific person is that you want in charge of your disposition. In other words, who the person is that needs to be in charge of your cremation or burial. Because a lot of times one person will be in charge of the financial aspect of things, but the funeral home still has to rely on the legal next of kin to be in agreement about who's going to decide, are you cremated or buried? And so it's good to put in a will to put that person in charge and to do all of that before things become emotional and upset and people are making decisions based on emotion. So it's kind of a dual process of protecting yourself against inflation, but also protecting yourself against making emotional knee-jerk reaction decisions at the time.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think a lot of people don't realize that your power of attorney dies with you. So that's something that you definitely need to make sure your family knows and that you're prepared for.
Definitely.
All right, Mark. Mark's joining us to talk about hospice and palliative care. You want to tell us the difference between hospice and palliative care?
Sure. Hospice is a medical specialty that focuses on somebody who's terminally ill, which is defined as somebody with a 6-month or less prognosis. That's the time they're expected to live. And in most cases, people don't understand hospice and what it's there for. They're in denial, or they have misconceptions. And usually people are referred to hospice within weeks or even days, many times, from the time that they're referred to hospice and the time that they have left to live. But we are there to actually support the patient and their family members, both physically, emotionally, spiritually, with a team that consists of a physician, nurse, social worker, chaplain, hospice aides, and we provide 4 different types of therapies: music therapy, art therapy, massage therapy, and Reiki therapy. So there's a lot of effort in helping those who are terminally ill and their family members who are suffering as well, seeing a loved one passing away, basically. And they're to help them through the process, versus what people think of hospice as death, and as though it might cause, as though we're there to accelerate the death. And that's actually illegal. And I've searched extensively just to see if there's any proof since the 46 years in the United States that hospice has been available in the United States alone. And I could not find one case where there's a hospice staff member who was found guilty of causing the death of a patient due to morphine. So it just, again, it's unfortunate that there's those misconceptions, but the earlier people understand and talk about hospice and having that as part of the planning, just as much as their finances and their arrangements for whether it's a cremation or a burial, is extremely important. The difference between hospice and palliative care is that we offer another medical specialty known as palliative care, which is for somebody who's seriously ill but not terminally ill. So one of the big differences is somebody can continue seeking treatments and receive palliative care from a team of a physician, nurse practitioner, and social worker who helps, again, the patient and the family deal with a serious illness, but they're not at the terminal stage yet. And the advantages to that are what I was saying. They're there to help guide the patient and the family through understanding their illness and where it may lead, and the different stages of the illness. And that helps prepare them for hospice. And they discuss advanced directives as well, which only helps making sure that they have their finances and burial or cremation plans arranged as well. So it all kind of works together. The earlier intervention with palliative and then with hospice, as well as the other services that have been discussed, only help people. It's a very traumatic time, and it's more traumatic when you have those conflicts, when somebody didn't have plans and they're dealing with who receives what, or do we do a cremation or a burial, who makes those decisions. And I just had that with a family member. My mother-in-law did not want to talk about any of this. She had no advance directives, and it was an absolute nightmare. It was already a traumatic experience to deal with. And on top of that, there was all the conflicts and all the struggles and all the stress of having to deal with these things without any type of pre-planning.
And I think that's when most family wars erupt. Now, one thing that people have like a really common misconception of too is how long you can stay on hospice. I know that people have graduated from hospice, and I also know that people wait way too long to come onto your services. So, talk to us about what the process is and getting on hospice. Like, what does your prognosis need to be in order to qualify, and how is it paid for?
Yes, it is very underutilized, but basically it's very technical. Any given disease, whether it's cancer, heart disease, lung disease, kidney, any type of neurological disease, we have patients who have Parkinson's and ALS and Alzheimer's and all types of dementia. Each one of those has a physical criteria that a physician will look at. You need to have two physicians agree on the fact that somebody has a terminal illness and a prognosis of 6 months or less. So there needs to be confirmation of that. And again, it's very technical. They look at all different factors as far as their condition, and it's a guess. And we know it's a guess because many times people live longer. And that's actually reports and studies that show people actually live longer on hospice very often than the original prognosis, only because if treatments are no longer effective or curative, and they're actually comforting the patient and improving the quality of life, we see them actually live longer and have a much better quality of life. So that's the part of getting involved with hospice. And people usually wait for a physician to refer them, but anybody could contact a hospice organization and request an evaluation, which doesn't cost anything. And they usually have somebody come out within a day or two because of the timing and the fact that when people think about hospice, they're many times days away from passing away. And they'll do an evaluation and we'll see if somebody qualifies for hospice. If they agree, or if they're unable to make decisions, if their healthcare surrogate agrees, then they can immediately be enrolled in hospice without a referral. And what happens then is every 90 days, there's a determination for 2 90-day periods whether or not somebody continues to qualify for hospice. And then after that, it's a 60-day window. And the reason I mention that is even though initially there has to be, a 6 month or less guess as far as somebody's life expectancy, as I said, people sometimes live a year, 2 years, and they can remain on hospice at that time. If their condition approves, then many times they no longer qualify for hospice and they what you call graduate from hospice. And it's ironic because during my first 2 weeks at Eval, I was traveling with different members of the team and met a woman who graduated from hospice and wasn't happy about it because Medicare was no longer going to cover the massages that she was receiving on a weekly basis. And she felt that helped improve her condition. So, and that's the other thing too. I don't know if you asked about cost, but Medicare does, if they have Medicare, that covers most of the time 100%. And our billing manager made me promise, I say most of the time because generally speaking, it's covered. And if not, we also accept Medicaid, private insurance, self-pay. And we have enough funds. We're fortunate that we have donations in the community to take care of those who have no money, have no insurance, aren't here legally. None of that matters. We provide hospice for every single person in the community who needs to have that service.
And that's one of the reasons I brought it up. I think people wait too long to inquire about the services. We've been paying into Medicare our whole lives. We really should be utilizing that resource. And I think a lot of times people even go towards private duty when in reality they could be getting these services from hospice if they just knew about the benefit and they weren't scared of the word. I think that word makes people very nervous, and what they need to realize is that we're all going to die, and this is a service that is just such a beautiful transitional program. I mean, I've been through it with my grandparents, so I know you obviously have been, working with them and been through it yourself. So, all right, perfect. Well, thank you so much. We'll loop back around. Greg, I want to talk to you about some of the questions that we get from people here traveling back and forth, our snowbirds, if you will. When does somebody need to review their documents? When do they need to have additional documents in place if they're a snowbird? Like for instance, if they own property, and how often, or if they live here for a while, when should they switch everything over to Florida?
Well, it can be kind of a complicated question because you're dealing with multiple states and different laws, and usually some tax problems, at least potentially, can crop up. I have a lot of those types of clients, of course. They'll come in, maybe they were vacationing here for a while and then decided why go back. That's kind of how a lot of us, myself included, ended up down here, and it makes perfect sense. Um, the nuances to what it takes to become a Florida resident, and sometimes more importantly, to be off the rolls of another state, especially those northeastern states that like to tax you a lot, can get into the weeds a little bit. But for the most part, if you're going to be a Floridian, you want to have your driver license here and your voter registration and your homestead designation on your primary residence, and kind of take your name off of the list for wherever else you would be. You want to be here the majority of the time, ideally, because some states, they're going to tax you like a resident if you spend the majority of time there, regardless of any of those other things. So there can be some pitfalls that you don't anticipate. And that has income tax issues that people are aware of, but it also has estate tax issues, because although Florida is not going to take a piece of an estate when someone passes on, other states will. And so you can end up where, there's a fight, or two states consider you a resident simultaneously, so they're both trying to tax you. But when you get to the point that really Florida is your place, then you want to have your will, your trust, all your other documents done here in Florida under our state's law. One, because that will help establish your residency. That's one of the pieces to the puzzle that they look at. And two, your whole estate is going to be governed by these laws. So you want documents that are going to be consistent and updated. Usually these are much older documents for, when the kids were young, and none of it makes a lot of sense now. So when we're trying to simplify things, and most of my clients say they want things simple, that takes a little upfront effort a lot of times to make sure that you've got the right marching orders, you've got documents that are going to work the way you intend them to here in Florida, and you're not going to run into roadblocks every time you turn around.
No, you're absolutely right. And I definitely think that even for those that, have gotten their documents done in Florida, if you live here for 10 or 15 years, you definitely want to have those revisited. What would you say, every 5 years?
I think that's a good rule of thumb. That doesn't mean you have to change things in 5 years. It might look fine, but it's a good time to get someone to look at it and just confirm. A lot of times I get a binder that has, about a half inch of dust on it, and, they just found it randomly. They don't know what's in it. They don't know what it says. When they hear, it's not what they remembered. It's not what they want. So there's a lot of times just to get a refresher, to get a tune up. Laws do change over time. Some more than others. Tax laws are in flux. Like those 15-year-old plans are going to look very different for a lot of individuals, because they may have been laser focused on estate tax planning, which is much less of a problem right now for most people, but that pendulum might be swinging back again. So you just want to make sure that things are consistent, updated, and look the way you want them to.
No, I couldn't agree more, because rules do change. I know that some of these talks that I've done, they say the durable power of attorney used to be, a couple pages, and now here in the state of Florida, there's multiple signatures required. It's just a totally different animal. So it's definitely, if you had your documents done, I think it's from 2011 and on, you definitely need to get them checked out sooner rather than later, from what I understand.
Yeah.
All right, Rachel. Now that we're talking about people that are snowbirds, let's say they've moved down here, they're here full time, they have their arrangements done up north, they pass away. What's the process with you guys? Do you have affiliations with funeral homes up north, and how does somebody get transported from like point A to point B?
Well, we do have a lot of affiliates all over the country. So usually we can look in our network and find an affiliate. And if it is one of ours, then the prepaid policy would transfer just as if it were the same funeral home, except for like maybe state or local county fees or death certificates or things like that that might be different. Either way, we can, even if there isn't an affiliate, we can still assist the family. We usually will honor pre-arrangements that have been set up out of state, even if it isn't from one of our affiliates. because in most cases, it's just a matter of filing a claim for the particular prepaid contract, which just requires a death certificate and a claim form and a statement of the funeral goods and services. So it's a fairly simple process to take whatever you've pre-planned, whether it's in Florida going up north or vice versa, if it was set up north and coming down to Florida. If someone has a pre-arrangement with us that was established in Florida, but they decide to leave because they're moving closer to their family or something, we can still honor that pre-arrangement for them. We can take care of being the funeral home to coordinate with the family so that they don't have to go out and try to find another funeral home. So we can enlist the help of another funeral home that's in the area, and they don't even have to really talk to them. We can kind of handle everything over the phone and online with the family, as far as handling all the documents and things that would be necessary. So we try to keep it as easy as possible, because once you pay into that prepayment policy, as we were mentioning before, because it locks in that price, you really want to try to keep that and utilize it as much as possible without making too many, changes or going through someone else or anything like that. So in a lot of cases, if someone is on hospice care, or if the family knows that they're becoming more of an imminent situation, they can actually call us ahead of time and let us know, mom is now up in, Illinois or something. But she has a prepaid plan with you. Who should the nurse call if something should happen? And they can still call us even in the middle of the night, and we can take over the arrangements to make more of a seamless transition for the family so that they're not struggling to figure out what to do at that hour.
The 11th hour, you definitely want to try to avoid those conversations if you can. It's important for us to talk about these things.
Yeah.
Now, Mark, as far as hospice goes, I know that Avow also offers a variety of other programs, even for children. So can you go through some of those additional programs that are offered other than just hospice care?
Sure. We also offer grief support, and that is for both adults and children. And we have group sessions and individual sessions if somebody just wants to call, if not comfortable being with a group, even though there's some advantages to being with a group that are going through what you're going through. But either way, whatever somebody's comfortable with. And those services are available to anybody in the community. They don't have to have had a family member who was a patient at Avow in order to receive those services. So we offer those services as well as caregiver support for those whose lives were turned upside down because their loved one is seriously or terminally ill. And we have groups and individual counseling for those people as well that just are looking for some kind of help dealing with the stress of having a loved one who's seriously ill. And we do a lot of events. We have a butterfly release coming up in April, and that's through our foundation to raise funds for these services. We also have educational programs that we do for both other professionals and members of the community. So we do quite a bit under that one umbrella of Avow, just to try to
Tap and Toe Tuesday.
Yeah.
There's a ton of different programs that they offer, music therapy, even equestrian therapy, I think was something that I saw recently come through. So
we partner with a lot of organizations as well and do, coordinated efforts to help those in the community.
Yeah. Now, Greg, I know when somebody, this is kind of off the cuff, but it does like loop the funeral arrangements in. When somebody is qualifying for Medicaid or, trying to spend down their assets, isn't your final arrangements is one way to do that? Talk to us a little bit about that process.
Yeah, so when we're dealing with Medicaid qualification, there's income limitations and asset limitations that someone has to satisfy before Medicaid's going to pick up the bill for their nursing home and long-term care. So some of the planning that takes place is to try to have assets that might have been countable, like cash in an account, be non-countable from a Medicaid standpoint. And when you're prepaying for your funeral, you can do that in kind of a simple trust that is going to be non-countable for qualification purposes. So it's one less asset that you'd end up just spending on a nursing home that you can actually use for these final expenses. And so you're really getting a double benefit in that circumstance. You're doing the favor to your loved ones where you've arranged for all of this. You don't have those friction points or that extra grief to deal with, and you've safeguarded a little bit more of your legacy that won't get burnt up. It'll be available for your loved ones, your surviving spouse, or your children down the road.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. And Rachel, one question I know we always get at an SVB University when we do them live is, what happens to me if I pass away on vacation overseas or out of the country?
Yeah, that's actually something that's more common than people might realize. If you think about it, I know the cruise industry is kind of slowed down right now, but back when people were cruising, you could just hop over to the Bahamas, and if something were to happen, you technically would be out of the country. So it creates a scary situation for families trying to navigate all of that. We have to work with a funeral home in that country if you're sending a person back to the United States. And additionally, even if there's a cremation that occurs there first and then sending the ashes back, different things, all different countries have different stipulations about what the paperwork requirements are, what the health department requirements are. So we would help to navigate through all of that. We do have the option with our prepayment policies. There's a travel protection that a family can purchase that would basically cover the cost that would be incurred from any of those expenses. If they have a pre-arrangement policy with us and they just happen to pass in a different country, if they don't have the travel protection, there would be a monetary amount that would go towards caring for those arrangements, but there would potentially be additional cost associated with the consulate fees or airline fees or whatever is associated with that. So it's often a beneficial thing just to get some information about when you're making the pre-plan to kind of weigh your options, whether you think that's something that could potentially become problematic, for you if you're accustomed to traveling outside the US.
Yeah, if you've got the travel bug, you need to check
Yeah.
it out, right?
Yeah.
All right, Mark, and we'll have you wrap us up. I know that we've talked a lot about the aftermath of having someone pass away, and one of the things that Avow has that I love, just as much as the grief support, is the opportunity to volunteer. So why don't you close us out with telling us a little bit about where Avow came from, because the gentleman that kind of created it is still a volunteer there and walks me back every time I come to a leadership meeting. So talk to us about the volunteer program.
Yeah, it was started, actually, Avow was founded by Bruce and Glenna Hayhoe, and Bruce would correct you as far as him starting it. He said that Glenna had about 90% of that responsibility for getting Avow going, but he was always there to support her. And Avow has existed for almost 40 years, and Bruce and Glenna are still very involved as volunteers. And we have staff orientation and we have volunteer orientation. And with COVID, there's been some restrictions where we've been doing things virtually, but when we had the volunteer orientations in person, Bruce and Glenn would be the ones that would greet them and tell the story about how they started Avow and all the different volunteer opportunities that exist. And they would just be thrilled speaking to the actual founders of Avow. But there's different types of volunteer opportunities, and it's starting to open up now. But generally speaking, you would have inpatient volunteer opportunities where you're working with patients. It could be companion care. It could be respite care. One day I was asked, it was really odd, I was asked to see if I can fill in for a volunteer. And it was a woman in Naples whose husband was bedbound. He was a hospice patient, and she just wanted to go out and get her hair done. And she said she needed about 2 hours. And when she came back, she was like, "Thank you so much. I needed that." So volunteer opportunity, and it felt good. It felt nice that, and I just sat, there was nothing for me to do, but I could never catch up with my emails. So I just sat in the living room, and it was a win-win because I was able to take time to take care of some things I needed to do. But there's a very rewarding experience for volunteers that work with our patients. And then there's non-patient types of activities. It's working with our office staff and helping them with different projects. There's events and where we need volunteers to help with many events that we would host at Eval. So there's many volunteer opportunities available for people.
Yeah, and once you lose a spouse or a pet, a significant other, finding these volunteer opportunities, I think, are invaluable. So I applaud you for affording that opportunity for people that are going through that. So thank you so much. And Greg, Rachel, thank you so much for joining us today. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So thanks so much for taking the time to watch our SVB University this morning, and